Sometimes a project fails. This can cause stress, frustration, and even loss of interest. But what happens when you decide to pick up the pieces and try even harder? This week, join me, Zach Walsh, as I talk with Dan from Paleo Gaming about his new upcoming game, Omega Horizon. This sci-fi tabletop role-playing game promotes you to build the world you want to see. We talk failure, asking for help, and releasing a project that satisfies you. Welcome to Schedule for Launch, a podcast to discover projects that you may have missed. This week I am joined by a creator that I've actually been trying to find some time to talk to. And Dan, thank you for coming on to talk about Omega Horizons with me.
Thanks so much for having me, Zach.
I saw you posting things throughout Twitter and stuff, and I think I had been following Paleo Gaming for a little while. And I was like, I need to figure out what they do, but just time. And thankfully you sent me a message, and I'm just really excited to be talking about this game.
Thanks. Yeah, always good to meet someone who's been following us for a while.
So before we really get into what Omega Horizon is, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Dan Prisco-Buxbaum. I'm the president of Paleo Gaming. I actually am a hydrogeologist. That's my day job.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But I started Paleo Gaming at this point about 7 or 8 years ago. We started it as an esports company. We were fielding competitive esports teams and running events and things like that. And I have always been a big fan of tabletop role-playing games. I've been a dungeon master since I was 14 years old. I'm now 34, so you've got 2 decades of experience. But as most DMs do, I eventually evolved beyond printed settings and source books and rules and started homebrewing things. And if you homebrew things long enough, they start to look like their own games. And at a certain point, I turned around and said, well, I have all this stuff done. I've been putting all this time and energy into developing this stuff. I wonder if other people would maybe be interested in some of the worlds I'm creating. And one thing led to another, and here we are, having launched the Kickstarter for Omega Horizon, which is already more than 650% funded, which is amazing and super exciting, and we're grateful for it. But it's becoming a reality.
Congratulations. That's great to hear.
Thank you.
So we can tell people a little bit more here. What is Omega Horizon?
It's a great question. Omega Horizon is a science fiction tabletop role-playing game with a completely original mechanic set. So it's not a reskin of like a 5e or Powered by the Apocalypse. It's its own system, which is it's based on 6-sided dice. It's a roll and keep system. So certain traits go into how many dice you roll, others determine how many you keep, and then that result is what you compare to your target numbers to determine if you succeed or fail. And the game is set in an original sci-fi setting that I have written. It's a game that focuses on customization in all things. Customization with character creation, customization as you develop your characters, even customization of the complexity of the rules that you can either tune the game to be fun for a group that prefers more narrative rules light play, or tune it for a group that really likes crunchy, complex mechanics and likes the number crunching and the min-maxing and all that stuff. There's something for everybody. This game is very flexible in that regard.
That's definitely something that I want to talk about, because I'm going to be honest, you guys did something that was so... You basically made 2 different games to make this one game work in like a way, but they complement each other so well. So we're going to get into that in a little bit, but you were talking about character customization, and yeah, there's a lot to this. Offhand, I think there's 12 species, 19 careers, 20 if you include custom career options. So this was all from the playtest that you sent me to look at and for me to come through and look at. Was this the playtest stuff, or was this all options that you really wanted to have on launch?
Oh yeah, these are all going to be in the core rulebook. All of these species, all of these careers, and especially, I mean, the thing we've gotten the most positive feedback on is the idea of these custom careers, where you can take the bits and pieces you like and mash them into something new that really speaks to your character as an individual, and where they fit into the universe. Again, as somebody who's been doing this for 20 years, I've seen so often players make the comment, I really like, cleric, but I would have preferred this thing, or I really like this, but I would have preferred that. And our system allows you to really just take a character and make them fit your vision for who you want them to be and how you want them to be. And that's super important to the core of our design philosophy, is giving players and GMs the most options so that this game can be sort of a complete solution for them. Even if they choose to reskin the setting, this game is really usable across multiple genres and across multiple settings. So on the one hand, we wanted to tell a great story, which I really believe we have, but on the other hand also, we wanted to give people a complete system that would really be a solution for their needs.
And I think you guys really have done that. Just from, I haven't been able to read it back to back yet because the I think I said it to you before that you have a very full playtest there. The playtest is 329 pages, which I think you said is basically the entire game right out there.
Yeah, it'll go through some revision, which will likely cut it down, but we also do some writing. I'm expecting we're probably going to clock in the vicinity of 350 pages is my estimate.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's really, first of all, I love how this book works together. Everything's very clean already. I'm excited to see how things go with it further on. But one thing we really wanted to talk about here is that original dice system. So you said it's a, it was a keep and succeed kind of system. You said
We call it a roll and keep system. That's not a term that we came up with. There have been a couple systems that have done that. For example, the Legend of the Five Rings. I think it was like second or third edition did that with 10-sided dice. They had a 10 a D10 roll and keep system. But we've done it in a different way, and we make the traits, what you might call attributes, and the skills go hand in hand in a way to determine the dice that you roll and keep in a way that hasn't quite been done before. And D6 roll and keep systems are very rare. I really don't know of any off the top of my head. I know Shadowrun uses D6, but I don't think it's quite roll and keep if I remember correctly. But not many do it, because 6-sided dice are a little tougher to work with than your base 10 metric system.
So could you explain how it works a little bit? Because I've personally never heard of a roll and keep system.
Sure. So you have what we call traits, which again, like a D&D game would call attributes: your strength, your agility, your constitution, intellect, wits, charisma, etc. And that is your kept number of dice. So what happens is, if you want to make a skill roll, you look at your skill group. Let's say we'll look at athletics for an example. Athletics is a skill group under which there's a number of individual skills: balance, climb, jump, etc. So your athletics determines how many dice you roll. If you have 5 in athletics, you're rolling 5 dice. If you have 6, you're rolling 6 dice. You then look at the trait that corresponds to the individual skill. So, for example, balance uses agility, or climb uses strength.
Okay.
So that determines how many of the dice you're rolling you get to keep to add up for your final total. So in the example that we say you have 5 athletics, if you have 4 strength, it means roll 5 dice, keep the 4 highest, and add them together. And that becomes a number. Then your individual skills you can have specialty ranks in that become a flat modifier on the end. So for instance, if you had, in this example, if you had 2 in climb specifically, you would just add 2 to your final number.
Okay. So it's like almost like a modified dice pool system then.
Sort of, yeah. So your skill groups are determining what you're rolling, your traits determine what you're keeping, and then your individual skills determine a modifier.
That's so straightforward, and I love that. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I think it actually lends a hand to potential homebrew campaigns, because if you come up with a new ability or something that you want to attach a skill to, you just create a new skill group with the skills that you think are covered under it. And it's very easy to then just put that right into the system. This will tell me the dice I'm rolling. I look at a trait for what I'm keeping, and I add my modifier. So it makes it very, again, customizable, which is what we're going for.
That customization really comes through in a lot of different ways. I was looking through, just thumbing through the book. The first thing you do is you look at that art, you look at some of the features, and one of the things that I noticed, for instance, was like an extensive list of different spaceships you can have. So it looks like you and Paleo Gaming have really set this up to give people options.
Yeah, that's the hope.
So, one thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, and I haven't unfortunately been able to sit down and watch it yet, is that you actually started kind of advertising, running, and trying this game out through a stream, correct?
Yes, that is correct. So we actually pre-filmed everything, premiered it on a week by week basis, once a week through Twitch.tv. We have a Twitch channel, and then loaded up to our YouTube channel. I ended up bringing on 3 experienced role players who have been in other streamed actual play games. Heather Drew, Avril Illijay, and Jessica Lynn Parsons. And Jess is actually, she's on the Dungeon Run, which is, I think, like the second biggest streamed game next to Critical Role. It's pretty big.
Wow. Okay. I had no idea.
Yeah. Yeah, we decided rather than just using our home group, we wanted to bring in people who knew, had camera awareness, and knew, how to convey that emotion and get people excited about the game and all that good stuff. And they were awesome to work with, yeah.
I'm so glad to hear that. Can you talk a little bit about the reception to that and what you found out, some of the things you learned during that?
Yeah, I mean, the reception was phenomenal, actually, and we had a lot of engagement during the premieres on Twitch. Myself and the actresses, they hung out in the chat since it was pre-recorded. We were able to just interact with the audience in real time, and the audience was really excited about everything, and not just about the story, which was great. Obviously people were really interested in the story, but off the bat, people were commenting on the rule system and the mechanics and how they felt it was lending itself to telling a great story. And we've seen actually a lot of people who watched that stream who hadn't heard of the game previously, who have now backed the Kickstarter and are in our Discord server talking about the games they're now running in Omega Horizon, and they're excited about it. And it's been a great reception.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit from the Discord, and I was really pleasantly surprised, because sometimes I'll hop into these games and it's either a quiet Discord or there's like a very vocal few, but you have like a pretty tight knit community that's formed around this game, and it just went into Kickstarter a couple days ago, right?
We're a week in, 1 week in, yeah.
Wow. Let's talk a little bit about the themes in this game and the setting. So you said that this is based on an old tabletop setting that you created.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, Omega Horizon. Originally, I did it as a a homebrew sci-fi version of the Chronicles of Darkness D10 success failure system. Though ultimately, I didn't feel like it completely worked with the setting, which is why I ended up creating my own setting instead. But its first iteration was for my home group as a homebrew setting. Yeah.
So it started with a homebrew setting, and I just wanted to some of the themes that are mentioned right in the top of the game for the base, no homebrew of this game and its setting are the 3 core themes to it, which are the humanity and the perils of AI, survivability in deep space, and individuality versus collective. Can you expand on these a little bit and tell us about how the system and the game lends itself to talking about these?
Sure. So the first big theme is the idea of humanity versus artificial intelligence and what defines humanity. For me, science fiction has always been a lens to examine our world and our choices as cultures and as people, and to take that in a way that takes all the political charge out of it, to just look at it objectively and say, is this right? Is this wrong? How do we really feel about these issues? And so I thought it was very important as I started creating a sci-fi IP that I wanted to tackle these philosophical, meaningful issues. And so the issue of very poignant, very relevant to today of, artificial intelligence. Some people are very much for it. Some people are afraid of it. And, will it take over and kill us all and all that other stuff. But I think that the best thing about AI is that it's a mirror for humanity, right? We're afraid of it because I think on some level we fear ourselves. And so we fear anything we create must be violent because we have violence, right? So I think that that's the beauty of AI is it is a mirror of who we are as a culture, and we're worried about it reflecting us too real. Well, then the answer is maybe we need to inflect a little, right? So that's part of it. And the other part of it is where's the line, right? As we start to advance as a culture and we start to integrate more technology into our bodies, there's that question of, do you cross an invisible line? Do you cross this threshold where you're not human anymore? Or is human, does that just mean your consciousness? Or what does it mean? And if that's true, well, then I think it broadens the idea of what classifies as human. And for that reason, to compare it to a contemporary, Shadowrun is a cyberpunk game. This game, I call it space punk because there's more space opera elements to it, but there's still a heavy cyberpunk element to our game. And Shadowrun and other cyberpunk games often incorporate some sort of limitation, a hard number of how much tech you can incorporate into your body before you lose your character, before it becomes nothing more than a machine. And I very purposefully didn't put that into the game. I didn't put a hard, fast limit of here's the line, because I think that's the thing to mine. That's the deep question to ask of, is there a line? And if there is, where is it? And does it functionally matter? And all that stuff. So I'm excited to see the stories people tell and how individual groups tackle and wrestle with that issue. So that's probably the most important issue for me in the game, the most important theme for me in the game, second to the other question, which is individuality versus the collective, right? The idea that people are good, but groups of people are bad, right? This mob mentality idea, and that secular groups can take advantage of people and all that stuff. So in Omega Horizon, I call it dystopian, but it's sort of an optimistic dystopian in a way, because the dystopian element revolves around the collectives. Every major faction in the game has this dark shadow about it, where even if they claim that they're altruistic and they're moral, you look at their actions and you have to question that because it doesn't line up, because they just have, justifiable collateral and all these negative traits about them. But on the individual level, people make a difference. People can be heroic. People can choose to do the right thing in the face of adversity. And so that's sort of this theme of who you are as an individual, how you relate to your faction. Are you the kind of person that just beats the drum and is ultra patriotic towards your faction, or do you sort of see through them, or are you disenfranchised with them? But that struggle of the individual versus the collective, I think that's something, especially now here in America today, we wrestle with a lot. Of, you could take two people, not to bring politics into it, but you bring two people from either side of the aisle and say, they live next to each other, they're neighbors, and I'm sure they're wonderful to each other, and they're pleasant to each other, and they like each other, and they do anything for each other. But then they're both separately caught up in this, the other argument, and they're divided, because that's what it is. On the individual level, people can connect and help each other and be good. But the second you conflate it to this bigger, higher cloud, this ethereal cloud of the social, cultural consciousness, is where things get messy.
I think those dualities in this game is really one of the things that is making me so excited to see what stories are going to be told, because you're a small independent company, but there's a lot of positive attention coming towards this. The tabletop role-playing scene's getting bigger and bigger every day, and I really feel like Omega Horizon can sort of fill a niche that a lot of games don't. So I think that a lot of people who are listening to this now or find it in the future or are looking for something new will really appreciate this game. And I think that's something that I'd really like you and your team to know right off the hop before we even go any further.
I appreciate it.
So let's get into a little bit more of the nitty gritty when it comes to characters. So I know that there are a lot of character options, and there are, like I said, a lot of species, and there are careers. Careers act similar to this game's version of classes.
Correct.
Yeah, how do they really differ?
How do the careers differ from classes?
Yeah.
So classes, to use D&D as an example, classes are great because they establish an archetype for you. You know, if you tell someone I'm playing a cleric, they automatically know the kind of character you're playing. If you tell someone you're playing a rogue, they automatically know the kind of character you're playing. So it informs how your character generally will approach things like combat, how they will potentially approach certain decisions in game. But the downside of classes is they can sometimes be very restrictive, where, you know, clerics do what clerics do and they don't do a lot else. They don't deviate much from that. Yes, there's some fiddly bits you can pick up in the game via feats or, you know, whatever the case may be, certain spells that allow you to encroach a little bit into other classes' territory, but largely they're meant to be their own thing and feel very distinct. But that means that you're stuck doing that thing. So careers in Omega Horizon are broader than that. Careers give you a unique ability that allows you to interact with your universe around you in a way that other careers can't. However, while the career determines your starting traits and skill groups, you have ultimate freedom to go outside of that as you build your character. So, as an example, if you think of soldier as your typical fighter or barbarian class as a comparable, you say, all right, well, this character is going to be very combat heavy and this and that. And certainly you can build them that way, or you cannot. You could build a soldier who will have a base level of military training and then invest all of your points of creation into more cerebral skills and make your character sort of like a combat scientist. And you can do that. You have ultimate freedom. You're not locked into anything to say, well, I picked soldier and now all I can do is fight things. You have a lot more freedom of how your character develops, which also allows you, and this is my favorite thing about role-playing games, to change and evolve. Maybe you make a soldier because you think you're going to be really combat focused, but in the first couple sessions you have really meaningful social interactions with certain people and decide, you know, my soldier, maybe he becomes like an ex-soldier. Maybe he becomes like a veteran who becomes sort of a bureaucrat and like he just wants to be a leader of, you know, fighting for the souls of the people. You can do that without having to re-roll your character. They can just evolve naturally. And I always loved games that gave you that room to branch away from your original choice to become more well-rounded or to shift your focus.
Yeah, that freedom's very clearly defined in this game too. The rules make it really easy to do that. And I think the one that's going to interest a lot of people is the custom career option. How does that work compared to a regular career?
So a custom career can be anything you want it to be, but for ease of use, to help people who may not, like, for example, GMs who may be new to crafting new things for a game, the base option is you choose a career ability from any other career, and that becomes your career's ability. You then choose core traits from any ability, core skill groups from any ability, and you make your own career. So as an example, I just said, all right, let's say you want to make a soldier who is sort of like a veteran who has become more of a social character. Well, by rules as written, the soldier gets athletics and combat as their starting core skills, and they get some points to start in that before they start spending their starting character points or CP to increase traits. Well, instead you say, okay, I'm making a new career. I'm going to call my career, you know, soldier bureaucrat or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter. And you say, all right, so instead of having athletics in combat, I'm going to lower the amount of combat he has to, or she has, or they have, to add some social. And you can do that. And so now you're starting to change that starting package in a way that fits your character. Similarly, if you are more creative and you say, you know what, I want a whole new career ability, as long as you have a conversation with your GM and they look at it and make an ultimate determination if they think it's balanced and fair, you can just make a new ability that may help you in, for example, combat and social situations. And you can do that. It gives you the ultimate freedom to craft balanced careers of your own that you feel really serve your character as an individual and a unique individual.
There's another piece of the character creation that I'm going to talk about in a moment, but that I think a lot of people are going to appreciate that specifically, because I know I used to play a lot of D&D, and it never felt like your level 1 through level 3 as a class. It always feels so. You think about choosing a bard and everybody's giving you eyes. So, I think this will help people get a little bit of freedom to get away from that. And the next part of character creation that I really liked was the tokens of destiny, because mechanically these serve as really powerful buffs or abilities, but also they're almost like a pre-built in little bit of story. How'd you go into designing the token of destiny system?
Yeah, so the token of destiny comes out of it was actually inspired by another indie game called Sagas of Midgard, which was made by Drinking Horn Games. They have an ability called With Joy I Cease. So their ability is a Viking game, and it's a high mortality game, so people die fairly often. But they wanted to make death meaningful. So this ability allowed you to decide your character would die regardless of rolls, but as a result, you got to automatically defeat the enemy. And so you then just describe whatever cool way you go out with a bang. And I liked that idea, but I didn't want it to be quite as fatal in our game. So, but I like the idea of players having more power around the table, right? We've evolved, I think, as tabletop gamers, away from this idea of the DM or the GM is God and you're all just dancing on their strings, to this idea of this is a game and we're telling a collaborative story. We all need to have more of a voice around the table. And so this sort of codifies and gives players a really easy way that they can sort of take the wheel at times and say, well, no, I want this to succeed. It's important to me that this succeeds, even if I would fail. Or, I don't know where to go with this, but rather than just make puppy eyes at you that you're going to throw me a bone, I'm going to take command of this and say, I do know this, and it should relate to me. So you've got a couple options when you use your token of destiny. Number one, it's used as a shield for you. You can negate all damage from one source for the round that you would take, whether that's an environmental source like a fire, or whether that's a single enemy who just bombed you. And you can do it after you know the damage is coming, right? This is meant to say, oh man, maybe I would get killed by this crazy thing. I want my character to survive. I'm using my token of destiny. This is not where I go down. The next thing you can do is turn all attacks made by your character into critical successes for one turn. And again, that's when you need to bring something big down and the group's not doing well, you think it may not end well, you can sort of pull this cord and do a whole bunch of damage. You can also use the token of destiny to automatically succeed on a skill roll after you know you failed. So again, the idea, like you try to make this epic matrix jump across buildings and you fall short and you're now looking at a 100-meter fall to your death, and instead you make sure that you make it just to the other side and grab on with your fingers and pull yourself up. You can also turn a successful roll into a critical success when you want to do something really, really cool. Or the last and most complex way to use tokens of destiny is to create a meaningful opportunity to move the story forward. That's what I was talking about of when players feel lost, right? Sometimes in a campaign, something happens. Let's say you're like, okay, our starship is damaged. We can't use our faster than light drive. We're stuck on a planet where there's nothing around. We're going to be waffling here for hours trying to figure out where we want to go next, unless the GM is kind. What I want to do is I'm going to use my token of destiny to say, oh, I actually, once a long time ago I was on this planet and I found a hermit and blah, 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 and they likely have the piece we need. And you do it in a way that you get to describe more of your backstory that makes your character meaningful for their presence to be there and moves the story forward and makes you not have to twiddle your thumbs and not know where to go next. But the other cool thing is your backstory, by using the tokens of destiny in this way, you organically develop your backstory, right? Too often, having run and played in games, I'm guilty of it as a DM sometimes too, players spend all this time on backstories, and they all get to tell each other at session 0 these cool backstories, and they never come up again. You're like, why did you even spend the time making them? Where this, like, it keeps bringing the backstory up, and you keep getting to strap little bits onto it that make your character just seem more three-dimensional and makes your backstory relevant to whatever you're going through at any given time.
It's one of those things that to me feels so obvious that it should be in more games that I'm really happy that it's true though. Like it makes sense because you're right. We've evolved from GM versus players for the most part. There are games and there are groups, but for the most part, we're trying to tell a story together and have some fun. So these little tokens that make you more powerful and your character a little bit more special or have a reason to be there, to me, it's like, why isn't it? And I'm really glad it's in a system like this because it just fits. It feels nice in it.
Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to really talk about was these Quickplay Rules. Because this game, like you said, it's very number crunchy sometimes. And personally, I love that. But I know there are people that I play with who would have a really hard time for me convincing them. So could you tell us a little bit about Quickplay Rules?
Yeah, so we call our narrative or quick play rules, we call them cinematic rules because that's the spirit of them, is that it's for moments when you don't want to be sitting there crunching numbers, you want things to just happen in a way it would like play out in a movie. It was born out of, honestly, my extensive experience as a game master because I happen to have a home group that is very much split, where half of the players really don't like number crunching. Math is not their strong suit, and they prefer quicker play, and they just want to they love story. They're story driven, move the story forward, please. And then I've got players that spend hours and hours and hours making characters, min-maxing every last iota of a bonus they can get on everything, because they just like big rolls, video game style. I want to crush things and just do big numbers. and neither, there's no right or wrong, right? That's both valid play styles. But when you have people in the same group, it becomes very hard to find a game that everyone enjoys. So for years, we just went through this cycle of we play one game and half the group would be happy and the other half would roll their eyes and just be along for the ride because they, this was our social group and they just wanted to be included. And then it would switch, and the other side would be really happy, and the first side would be bored to tears while we spent 2 hours going through combat, whatever the case may be. And so I thought long and hard about how to do that, and of course, if you are a game designer, as you're making a new game, especially if it's an original system, every designer comes to this crossroads where you say, is my game rules light or rules heavy? And I didn't want to make that choice. I wanted it to be whatever the players wanted it to be. And so it was important to me that we had the ability to choose, but I didn't want to create a situation where you still were committing to one or the other, right? If I made 2 separate games essentially and put them together and said this is rules light and this is rules easy, you still have the same problem because the people whose groups are split will say, well, half the group isn't happy this time, next time we'll do the other way. I didn't want that either. I wanted to create a unified system with a sliding scale, where you could seamlessly move between complex rules and simple rules without anyone drawing up new characters, without breaking the game in any way. And so that's what I did. And so basically, looking at the scale, it starts out rules as written fairly complex. I think most people would agree it's a pretty crunchy system, rules as written. But then there's a section that talks about the cinematic play and about how you start to pare it down. Like the first thing you do is you get rid of environmental modifiers, where you're just dealing with what's on the character sheets. Then the next thing you get rid of is the secondary skill modifiers and the tools and all this stuff. And then you're down to your base rolls, but you can simplify it further than that. Let's say you're in a situation, and this actually came up during the actual play. During the 3rd episode of the actual play, the players venture into cyberspace, and they actually enter a program called Hero's Destiny, which is like a superhero video game in cyberspace. So they get superpowers and they get to fight things. Well, the first encounter they had as superheroes is they fought this army of robots. But that's a lot of enemies to be rolling for individually, right? You're talking about dozens. So are we going to then spend the whole episode doing that? I had no desire to do that. So I immediately said, all right, everyone, we're switching to cinematic rules here. I want everyone to tell me your traits and your skills and your modifiers, and they did. And as the GM, I made a single roll that determined success or failure. And they succeeded. So I told them, all right, you've beaten your cinematic roll. Now you just get to have fun. Tell me how you beat them. And so they went into description of throwing robots into each other and pummeling them and using their powers and doing all this stuff. And it ended up being a 5 to 10 minute scene or whatever of just them having fun. Just winning, just feeling strong, just feeling in charge. And they plowed through it. And then afterwards, now they fight the boss. The boss was this digital kaiju monster. And so now I'm like, all right, well, this fight needs to be impactful. Their decisions need to matter. They need to be agonizing a little bit over like, oh, what's the next move? We don't want to botch this. So then we switch back to complex rules for that fight, because now we want them to be in the moment, moment to moment, making tactical decisions. And so being able to instantly switch from one to the other, I feel like is a huge benefit to GMs being to run things. Also, what DM hasn't had like this great, amazing story planned, and session one it gets derailed by, I want to start a bar fight. And you're like, well, there goes session one. Right? This bar fight's going to take up half the session. It doesn't have to. Now you can be like, all right, so I plan on running a fairly complex game, but it's important my players want a bar fight. I don't want to tell them they can't do it because they want to have fun and they should have fun.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't want it to detract from time. We're going to do the bar fight cinematically, and then we'll move back to the complex rules.
Oh, that's such a fun way to do it, too. So, you and the other fine folks you've worked with on this game have been going at it for about 3 years now.
Correct.
And a major part of that actually was during the pandemic. So can you tell us a little bit about how the pandemic affected development of this game?
The pandemic definitely slowed the game. Honestly, the biggest effect of the pandemic struck really in the midst, just before we launched our first Kickstarter attempt for this game. And I think it definitely contributed to why it didn't fund the first time. There was a number of things that happened. I also got kind of blindsided by the release of the... why is it slipping my mind? Altered Carbon. The Altered Carbon.
Oh, yes.
Which that's like a direct competitor for us. So that was kind of
Yes.
tough. That if people are picking between that game and an unknown, they're picking that game, and I understand completely. I actually backed that game also. It's a great game.
It's very
it couldn't be helped. Couldn't be helped. So so that happened in the pandemic, and people's wallets kind of clamped shut. So that was the biggest effect, I would say, is that it derailed us. But honestly, that ended up being a miraculous failure for me, because while I was very discouraged, I actually walked away from the game for a little while. I'd say I probably didn't touch it for 6 months after that. You know, it's kind of down. It's tough. You put all this time and energy into something, and then you don't get your goal, and it's really tough. But because I stepped away, I ended up having the serendipitous meeting online between myself and Chris Allen of Onyx Path. Chris Allen he was the lead writer on the Werewolf the Forsaken 2nd edition game, and he's now the line developer for Aberrant for Onyx Path. And I'm a big Werewolf the Forsaken fan. I've been playing Werewolf since I was a teenager. It's my favorite of their game lines. I actually have a tattoo of the Blood Talon tribe logo. So I met Chris. Chris is a super cool guy, and he ended up running an actual play for myself and two of my close friends of Werewolf the Forsaken, which is actually on our YouTube channel also. But anyway, so by meeting Chris, I've hired Chris. He's doing the short fiction chapter intros for a number of the chapters, which was a really cool opportunity. And just getting to pick his brain about development stuff and about some of the stuff maybe we hadn't figured out yet. He was the one who actually recommended to me that I should consider doing an actual play, which ended up being wildly successful, and we have brought in a bunch of backers that way. And so that was super valuable for me, and I don't know that I would have had that experience or that connection with him if not for the fact that we failed that Kickstarter. And of course that connection led to me doing certain things that I then connected with other people. So for example, because he recommended doing the actual play, he recommended that I look at people with experience doing it. I ended up meeting the three very talented actresses who participated in it, who in turn helped me make some other connections in the industry. So it sort of has been a very serendipitous story of the failure that was born out of the first Kickstarter not succeeding, leading to the decided success that we've been experiencing with the second Kickstarter. And that's been really impactful for me.
That is so that's so cool. I'm so happy for you. That sounds amazing. I'm glad that you
Thank
had
you.
those opportunities. That's great. We're actually starting to run a little bit low on time here, Dan. So I got two more questions for you.
Sure.
So one question I really like asking everybody who comes onto this show, because I think a lot of people who listen to this are also trying to maybe sit down and knock out their own project. What advice can you give to somebody who's trying to make their own game, but they don't know where to start?
I think that the most important thing is discipline. You have to go about things in a meaningful way, right? It's easy to just focus on the cool bits, but very often, like the cool bits, I can sit down if I'm writing story stuff, whatever else, I can crank out 4,000 words easy in a day, and I blow through it, and it's fine. And the days I go through the bits that are less fun to do, the more reference book bits of like, okay, I just need to, everyone knows about swimming, but I have to write about swimming, right? Like, it's something silly or stupid, but it's important to be in the book, and you have to put it there. It could take me all day to write 500 words for something like that, and it's tough, but you have to be disciplined. You need to create lists of what you need. You need to do some research to know what goes into developing a game, and the industry is a relatively small industry full of a lot of really cool people who are very happy if you ask them to help you figure out what needs to go into a tabletop game. And once you know that, you need to make a list, you need to tackle it, you need to schedule time to tackle it, you need to hold yourself accountable for that, tackle it piece by piece, and before you know it, 500 words becomes 1,000 words, becomes 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 words, but you have to do it step by step. It can be very daunting to just look at the end goal of I need to write 250,000 words. You need to just tackle it in bite-sized pieces, and you need to be disciplined about how you do that. And also recognize when you are out of your depth and ask for help. Because I am a fairly strong writer. That's why I've done the lion's share of the writing for the game. But at the beginning, I was convinced I was going to do the layout design for this game. Out of hubris, I guess. I realized that I'm not a graphic designer. And so it seemed at a certain point, it dawned on me that I was like, I'm spending all this money and effort getting all these great, very talented illustrators to do all these illustrations, and then I'm going to put it together like a do-it-yourself craft book. It's going to look horrible. Like, I need to pay for a layout designer. I have to do it. And so we brought in Owen, who is very, very talented. We put up in the Discord channel some test templates, and it's fantastic because he's a professional. And there's times that you need to take that step. And the other thing is, be willing to invest in your project. And I know that can be very hard for indie developers, myself included, because money's a commodity. It's hard to come by. But literally, if you have to save in small increments of $10 or $20 a week, put it aside and say, this is for my game, what you'll find, or what I found at least, is in the beginning that money doesn't go very far. You spend, way too much money on your first couple pieces of concept art or whatever the case may be. But having that lets you then start to access the people who are more efficient, who can do it cheaper, who can give you really high quality stuff. And that's how you get from your initial really rough concepts to better concepts to finished pieces and then as you start building it, that's when you can approach crowdfunding and show people, hey, I'm serious about this. I've put in my due diligence. I've brought in talented people to help me, that it's not all on me. And here's what I'm going to put together. And you can end up putting together something that is indie, but looks like it came out of a big studio.
If you, audience, want proof of that, go look at the Kickstarter and just look at a couple pieces. This was one of the most shockingly pretty just books right off the hop. Like, before I even got into it, I was impressed. So Dan and his team have worked really hard on it, and I think they deserve at least you to go and take a glance.
Appreciate it.
So, final question of the night, Dan. Where can people find more about you and Omega Horizon?
Sure. So we do have Paleo Gaming has a website, www.paleogaming.com. We also have a website that you can access through the Paleo website, but it has its own link of www.omega-horizon.com. Of course, there's our Kickstarter campaign. I don't know if you can put a link to that here, but otherwise, again, that you can find through our website also. You can follow us on Twitter at paleo_gaming, or on Facebook at facebook.com/paleogaming, all one word.
All right. As always, everybody, those links are all going to be down below. Anything that isn't, we'll get it down there for you if you ask. So, Dan, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk about this game with you. I'm so excited to see what happens next. I definitely have your actual play on my list to watch, and I'm very excited about that. So thank you so much for coming out here tonight. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Zach. It was a pleasure.
All right. And as always, audience, thank you for listening. Dan and Omega Horizon, they're currently kickstarting, and they are scheduled for launch very soon. So go check them out. Take care. Have a good night. Bye. Thank you so much to Dan for coming out to the show this week. I can't tell you all why, but for this interview, I was so really nervous, and I think it might be just because of how much I respect Dan for his visions on Omega Horizon and the confidence level he has. As of today, August 24th of 2021, Omega Horizon will only be on Kickstarter for one more week. I've talked to Dan during the production of this episode and been watching the Kickstarter closely, and I can assure you that if you've been on the edge of backing this one or not, and you are unsure if you should, I'd recommend just doing it. The price is really fair, and you only have one more week. So the 31st of August is the last day to back it. And aside from that, thank you, listeners. We've crossed over 400 downloads, and I'm just so thrilled that you've all helped me do this. Conversations around these indie games are starting to come up more, and my socials are constantly chiming with somebody wanting to tell me about their things, and I've absolutely loved it. It's been a lot of fun, and I can say without a doubt this is probably the most proud of anything I've ever really been. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for supporting me while I talk with these people and see where they came from. If you want to hear more from the show, make sure you spread the word. Word of mouth is how we grow around here, and I'd love to reach even more people if we can. Next week, I'm going to be bringing on a more lighthearted game with a very serious theme, and we're going to be talking with Moss about their game, Trastronautica. I think you'll like it. See you next week, and take care.